ریاست جمهوریشون بود. در ایران هم که دوستان همه گفتن، ولی بازم خدمت این دوست عزیزی که تماس گرفت از ایران انتقاد، شما در زمانی میتونی انتقاد بکنی که نفر مقابل انتقاد پذیر باشه. جاده‌ای که مال 30 سال پیش طرحش رو خود خدا بیامرز شاه گذاشته، چه جاده سازی شده که ما بخوایم ازش انتقاد کنیم و دست بزنیم نقطه‌های مثبتش؟ یه نقطه مثبت تو جمهوری اسلامی اگه انجام شده باشه، من مچمو میزنم از بعد از انقلاب. راه آهن که مال زمان شاه است، جاده سازی مال زمان شاه، هیچ چیز استاندارد جدیدی ما نداشتیم.
خب حالا به هر حال پروژه‌های ساخت و ساز، حالا هم جاده‌ای هم توی روستاها خیلی پروژه‌های آبادانی هم زیاد بوده، ولی ما وارد حالا خیلی اون بحث نمی‌خوایم بشیم.
The supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, wasn't elected by the people, has been in office for nearly 30 years, and if you insult him, you risk going to prison in Iran. How is that democratic by any definition of that word?
The leader in Iran is also elected. Please check our constitution.
29 years ago.
No, and he can be removed any day by a body that elected him, and that body was elected by the people. Every country has their own...
The Assembly of Experts.
The Assembly of Experts.
But the Guardian Council, which he appoints, has a veto over that.
Has a veto over what?
Over the Assembly of Experts, in picking the members of the Assembly of Experts.
No.
Iran isn't a democracy, it's a theocracy with a supreme leader who gets the final say over everything that matters, hence the name Supreme Leader. So it's a mistake for outsiders to spend so much time poring over these election results for a parliament which doesn't have much power.
I actually don't see it as that black and white. At the end of the day, the Assembly of Experts that the Iranians voted for, technically on paper, according to the constitution, is the body that is supposed to appoint and even oversee the supreme leader, as you may, or the leader of Iran.
Would you say they are different compared to what we saw back then?
Definitely these are very different. In 2009 it was a very political atmosphere. It shaped around the presidential election, which is the most important political event in Iran. There was clear leadership, political parties, established groups were involved. There was a direction, there was a plan. These protests don't really have leaders, they don't have a clear direction and plan, and a lot of times you just see people on their own on the streets, and that's how it leads to more radicalization, more radical slogans.
من میدونستم که آمریکایی‌ها اونقدر وقاحت دارن که میخوان یک چهره وارونه‌ای از حاج قاسم ترسیم بکنن. لذا اولین هدف همکاران من در وزارت خارجه این شد که ما تبلیغات رو به دست بگیریم و حاج قاسم رو به عنوان قهرمان مبارزه با تروریسم معرفی بکنیم.
Soleimani was seen a little bit different compared to other IRGC commanders because he was seen as a war hero fighting Iran's fights outside its borders, specifically with ISIS. A big portion of the population, beyond just the supporters of the regime, see ISIS as a real threat, that Soleimani was fighting outside of Iran's borders, that if he wasn't fighting, would have came into Iran's borders, and that Iranians would have to fight inside their own countries.
مردم با تیر زدن! مردم با تیر زدن! مردم با تیر میزنن!
Can you explain how these protests broke out and also how you're learning about what's happening with an almost complete internet shutdown?
sudden increase in gas prices on Thursday night basically ignited the protests on Friday. We have to remember that fuel prices are heavily subsidized, have been heavily subsidized in Iran, and still with the almost 300% increase, it's much lower, relatively lower compared to world prices, and this has been an economic problem for the government, the high amount of money that they've been spending on subsidies, and the government has been struggling to somehow manage this, but it seems like they basically rolled it out or mismanaged it.
Protests continued in almost 100 cities and towns across Iran, and in some areas it has become very, very violent on both sides. There's been a lot of vandalism in different towns.
The U.S. government, basically by crippling sanctions, is partially responsible for the economic crisis that Iranian people are in. So even if they're not spinning the protests or the violence, they're part of the problem and not the solution.
We have seen reports of many hundreds more killed in and around Tehran. And as the truth is trickling out of Iran, it appears the regime could have murdered over 1,000 Iranian citizens since the protests began.
And no one's reported over 1,000 except for a few political groups outside the country. And for the State Department to come out with a number like that without any sourcing, without any backup from credible human rights organizations who are doing professional work documenting this, it hurts the credibility of the State Department, and it also is not a very beneficial thing in a situation. You don't need to hype what's going on because it's already pretty bad.
Why would they be wanting to hype it up so much if that's what they're actually doing?
Well, it's been the policy of the Trump administration since President Trump came into office to portray Iran as this super bad actor.
A Reuters special investigation has uncovered that the death toll from last month's protests in Iran is much, much higher than initial estimates from human rights groups and the U.S. government. Reuters can now report that 1,500 people are thought to have died. Most organizations had previously put it in the hundreds. The number came to Reuters from sources inside Iran's government and close to the inner circle of the man at the top, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
When it comes to the death toll, this is just something that only Reuters has reported. There's no byline on the report as far as knowing who reported this. And the sources from inside the country are also unnamed, but it's mentioned that they're Iranian officials. I've seen reporters, I've seen analysts from the New York Times, from the Financial Times, really questioning how Reuters arrived at this specific number of 1,500.
So there was some photos circulating of actual plane parts that then later was rejected, that could be some evidence for an imminent attack. So far we're really waiting for evidence, the review of the black box or any kind of information either from the Iranian or the Ukrainian side. Of course, because of this precedent with another Ukrainian plane that was basically shot down. This just seems like something that people are reminded because this was also another Ukrainian air flight, basically.
Yeah, the Iranian military is denying any notion of a missile bringing down this plane. As you said, it's too early to tell. But the fact that Iranian officials at this stage are refusing to release the black boxes, which are critical in trying to find out what happened minutes and seconds before this plane came down. What do you make of that? That doesn't feel quite normal to me.
Well, it could be, but it could also be that they want to review first. And I mean, there could be something nefarious about it or the exact opposite. We still don't know what the situation is with that. And also, let's remember that Iranian airlines in the country, this wasn't an Iranian airline, but because Iranian airlines do actually 2 years of sanction, have an aging fleet, plane crashes in Iran are not very much news. It's something that's a recurring problem, and people have heard this news in the past as well. So they might just be doing their own review of this. And then at the same time, we have to also realize that I don't see much benefit for Iran in this, to shooting down a passenger plane right up from their own capital.